review of 2015, it was minus 1.3%. From next year, it will be plus 1.2% average annual real growth. But that is not the limit of my ambition. When our EU negotiations deliver a deal, as I'm confident they will, I expect that the deal dividend will allow us to provide further funding for the spending review. The hard work of the British people is paying off. Austerity is coming to an end. Now, Mr. Deputy Speaker, you will know better than most that every Chancellor likes to have a rabbit or two in his hat as he approaches a budget. But this year, some of my star bunnies appear to have escaped just a little bit early. In June, my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, announced the single largest cash commitment to our public services ever made by a peacetime government, an £8.4 billion five-year deal for our precious NHS, half as much again as the increase Labour offered the NHS at the last election. And let me be clear, we are delivering this historic £20.5 billion real terms increase for the NHS in full over the next 5 years. So in a very important sense, Mr. Deputy Speaker, we made our big choice for this budget 4 months before it was delivered. And this was the right decision. Our NHS is the #1 priority of the British people. And as we approached the 70th anniversary of its foundation, they had a right to know the scale of our commitment to it. But the British people also care that money invested in the NHS goes to the front line and to improvements in services. So we didn't just hand over money. We agreed that the NHS would produce a 10-year plan, setting out how the service will reform, how waste will be reduced, and exactly what the British people can expect to get for their money. That plan will be published shortly, but I shall give the House a sneak preview today. I too can poach a rabbit every now and then. There are many pressing demands on additional NHS funding, but few more pressing than the needs of those who suffer from mental illness. And today, I can announce that the NHS 10-year plan will include a new mental health crisis service with comprehensive mental health support available in every major A&E, children and young people's crisis teams in every part of the country, more mental health ambulances, more safe havens in the community, and a 24-hour mental health crisis hotline. These new services will ensure that people suffering from a crisis, young or old, can get the help they need, ending the stigma that has forced too many to suffer in silence, and ending, too, the tragedy of too many lives lost to suicide. We are proud to have made this extraordinary commitment to funding our NHS, a precious institution that has been nurtured for most of its life by Conservative governments. Mr. Deputy Speaker, departmental spending allocations will be settled at the spending review next year. However, there are a small number of areas where I will provide further support now in order to deliver necessary certainty for forward planning. Local government has made a significant contribution to repairing the public finances, and this budget ensures local councils have more resources to deliver high-quality public services. We're giving councils greater control over the money they raise through the adult social care precept, through our plans for increased business rate retention from 2020, and by removing the housing revenue account cap so that councils can help to build the homes this country needs. We will shortly publish our Green Paper on the future of social care, setting out the choices, some of them difficult, for making our social care system sustainable into the future. But I recognise the immediate pressures local authorities face in respect of social care. So today, building on the £240 million for social care winter pressures announced earlier this month, I will make available a further £650 million of grant funding for English authorities for 2019-20 and an additional £45 million for the Disabled Facilities Grant in England in 2018-19, and will invest a further £84 million over the next 5 years to expand our successful children's social care programmes to 20 further councils with high or rising numbers of children in care, allowing councils to improve services for older people, for people with disabilities and for children in care now, while longer-term funding decisions will be made at the spending review. Mr. Deputy Speaker, the UK spends more on defence than any NATO member except the US. But over the last year, we've had stark reminders of the scale, scope and complexity of the threats we face. My right honourable friend, the Defence Secretary, is working with the Cabinet Office and the Treasury to conduct a review into the modernisation of our armed forces in response to the evolving threat, which will form the basis for a comprehensive consideration of defence spending next year. But as a former Defence Secretary myself, I understand the immediate pressures our armed forces are facing. So I will today provide an additional £1 billion to the MOD to cover the remainder of this year and next, to boost our cyber capabilities and our anti-submarine warfare capacity, and to maintain the pace of the Dreadnought programme to ensure continuous at-sea deterrence. A deterrent, Mr. Deputy Speaker, that allows us to sleep easy in our beds, but one that the Leader of the Opposition and his Shadow Chancellor have spent their political lifetimes campaigning to abolish. Nobody should be in any doubt that on this side of the House we are proud of our armed forces, and we will always back them with the investment they need to keep this country safe. And Mr. Deputy Speaker, it is not only our armed forces that keep us safe. Our counter-terrorism police play a vital role in defending Britain against the evolving threats we face. We committed in 2015 to spend 30% more on counter-terrorism capabilities over the current spending review period. And today, I commit an additional £160 million of CT police funding for 2019-20 to protect CT police numbers in 1920 and to allow future CT police funding to be considered in the round at the spending review. I recognise that policing more generally is under pressure from the changing nature of crime. I also recognise the representations made on this by many colleagues, such as my honourable friend, the member for South West Bedfordshire. And I can tell the House today that my right honourable friend, the Home Secretary, will review police spending power and further options for reform when he presents the provisional police funding settlement in December. Mr. Deputy Speaker, as I have already set out, due to the hard work of the British people, public borrowing this year is coming in substantially below forecast. This allows us to provide additional support for public services in the spending review and contributes to the significant reduction in forecast debt this year. But I also want to use this good news to give a little bit back where it can be put to good use in this financial year. Mr. Deputy Speaker, this year marks a century since the end of the First World War. And as we remember our fallen servicemen and women whose sacrifice ensured the freedom we enjoy today, many projects are raising money for veterans' charities from sales of commemorative items on which VAT is charged. Now, we cannot waive the VAT due on these sales, but we can make a donation with the VAT we will receive. And I commit today that the Treasury will mark the centenary of the armistice by making a donation of £10 million to the Armed Forces Covenant Fund Trust to support veterans with mental health needs. Many of our nation's village halls, Mr. Deputy Speaker, were built to commemorate the sacrifice of World War I, and many of them are being refurbished to commemorate the centenary. So I will also provide funding for grants equivalent to the VAT chargeable on such refurbishment projects. And as our focus moves from the anniversaries of the First World War to the Second, I will also provide £1.7 million for educational programmes in schools to mark the 75th anniversary of the liberation of the Bergen-Belsen concentration camps, ensuring the next generation hears the stories of those who survived the Holocaust and of the British soldiers who liberated them. Because, Mr. Deputy Speaker, as the terrible events in Pittsburgh this weekend remind us, the battle against anti-Semitism did not end with the defeat of Nazi Germany. Across the length and breadth of England, our air ambulance services work tirelessly to get those with life-threatening illnesses and injuries quickly to the expert medical care they need. Funded entirely by philanthropy, they do a fantastic job. And today, I'm making £10 million of funding available to help them go on doing so. Mr. Deputy Speaker, we are investing record amounts in our schools, and that investment is paying off, with 86% of schools now rated good or outstanding, compared to 68% in 2010. But I recognise that school budgets often do not stretch to that extra bit of kit that would make such a difference. So today I'm announcing a £400 million in-year bonus to help our schools buy the little extras they need. A one-off capital payment directly to schools, averaging £10,000 per primary school and £50,000 per secondary school. And, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I have one final in-year measure to announce. Every Member of Parliament will testify that potholes are high on the public's list of concerns. So as autumn takes hold, I am making an additional £420 million available immediately to local highway authorities to tackle potholes, bridge repairs and other minor works in this financial year. But, Mr. Deputy Speaker, if we want sustainable world-class public services and rising living standards, we must make the serious long-term reforms our economy needs to tackle the productivity challenge, to prepare our nation for the technological change ahead, and to show the next generation that our market economy can evolve once again to meet the needs of the new age. Because for us on this side of the House, ending austerity is not just about funding public services, it's about real wage growth, and it's about leaving more of people's hard-earned money in their pockets. This is the nation of the Industrial Revolution, of Stevenson, of Whittle, Lovelace and Faraday, people whose ideas shaped the world around them. And today, Britain once again can lead the world as we exploit a new wave of scientific and technological discovery pouring out of our universities and research institutes. And we can solve the productivity challenge if we are willing to embrace the future, to make the choice to invest in infrastructure, in research, in skills and in our regions, to manage change, not hide from it. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I believe passionately in this agenda, but even I would admit that perhaps at the last two budgets I might have given the House just a little bit more detailed information on productivity and technological innovation than it strictly needed. So, Mr. Deputy Speaker, this time I'll leave it to the Budget Red Book to set out more details of the many measures we will take today. But, Mr. Deputy Speaker, sensing the disappointment of my colleagues, I will just mention that this list in the Budget Red Book includes our commitment to technology, with £1.6 billion of new investments to support our modern industrial strategy, ranging from nuclear fusion to quantum computing. £150 million for fellowships to attract the brightest talent to these shores from around the world, so that our scientific research continues to lead the world. And our commitment to infrastructure, expanding the National Productivity Investment Fund once again to over £38 billion by 2023-24, so that over the next 5 years, total public investment is growing by 30% to its highest sustained level in 40 years, and will, on average, be an astonishing £460 million a week higher in real terms than under the last Labour government. A Conservative government, Mr Deputy Speaker, investing in the roads, the railways, the research and the digital infrastructure that will power this country in the 21st century. Mr Deputy Speaker, half of the UK's £600 billion infrastructure pipeline will be built and financed by the private sector. And in financing public infrastructure, I remain committed to the use of public-private partnership where it delivers value for the taxpayer and genuinely transfers risk to the private sector. But there is compelling evidence that the private finance initiative does neither. The Shadow Chancellor, of course, rages against PFI at every opportunity, yet curiously forgets to mention that nearly 90% of those contracts were agreed by the last Labour government, leaving the nation with a bill of more than £200 billion to pay off, in what would be the most potent symbol of the economic mismanagement of the last Labour government if only Gordon Brown hadn't sold the gold. Labour's policy is to terminate all these contracts, triggering the ruinous penalty clauses that they themselves agreed to in the first place, adding tens of billions more to an already enormous bill. A classic Labour solution, pouring good money after bad. I will not do that. We will honour existing contracts. But the days of the public sector being a pushover must end. We will establish a centre of excellence to actively manage these contracts in the taxpayer's interest, starting in the health centre. And we will go further. I have never signed off a PFI contract as Chancellor, and I can confirm today that I never will. I can announce that the government will abolish the use of PFI and PF2 for future projects, putting another legacy of Labour behind us. Mr Deputy Speaker, we're investing in our nation's infrastructure and backing the technologies of the future. But we know that the real engine of growth is enterprise. The Right Honourable Member for Hayes and Harlington lists fomenting the overthrow of capitalism as his pastime. Mine is reinvigorating capitalism for the digital age. Because, Mr Deputy Speaker, I want Britain to be one of the great winners of the technological revolution. On this side of the House, we will always back enterprise and the market economy that underpins it, because we know it is the only way to deliver the high-wage, high-skill economy of the future. And as we finalise our departure from the EU and deliver a deal that secures Britain's future trade, we must unleash the investment that will drive our future prosperity. So today I can announce a package of measures to stimulate business investment and send a message loud and clear to the rest of the world: Britain is open for business. Mr Deputy Speaker, I am increasing the annual investment allowance from £200,000 to £1 million for 2 years, delivering on a long-standing ask of the British Chambers of Commerce. I'm providing a targeted relief for the cost of acquiring IP-rich businesses and introducing a permanent tax relief for new non-residential structures and buildings, partly funded by an adjustment in the special writing down rate for long-life assets from 8% to 6% to better align the tax and accounting treatment of these assets. To support British exports, we will increase UKEF's direct lending facility by up to £2 billion. We'll open the use of e-passport gates at Heathrow and other airports, currently only available to EEA nationals, to include visitors from the United States, Canada, New Zealand, Australia and Japan. And we will provide an additional £200 million of funding to the British Business Bank to replace access to the European Investment Fund if needed. We'll back another 10,000 entrepreneurs by extending start-up loans funding to 2021, and following representations from the FSB, I'm extending the new enterprise allowance, providing mentoring and support for benefit claimants to get their business ideas off the ground. And with thanks to my honourable friend, the member for Thurston-Moulton, we're working with the FCA on expanding access to the Financial Ombudsman Service for larger SMEs. As well as backing businesses to invest and grow, we will also make sure British workers are equipped with the skills they need to thrive and prosper. We've introduced a new system of T-level vocational training, have put the first £100 million into the new National Retraining Scheme, and through the apprenticeship levy, we're delivering 3 million high-quality apprenticeships in this Parliament. But that system, Mr. Deputy Speaker, is paid for by employers, and it has to work for employers. So today, in addition to the flexibilities I announced earlier this month, I can announce that for smaller firms taking on apprentices, we will halve the amount they have to contribute from 10% to 5%. In total, this is a £695 million package to support apprenticeships. Mr. Deputy Speaker, as our economy evolves in the digital age, so too must our tax system, to ensure that it remains fair and robust against abuse, and that it raises the revenues we need to fund our public services. The employment allowance was introduced to incentivise businesses to take on employees, but at a flat rate of £3,000 per employer, it does not provide any real incentive for larger employers. So from April 2020, we'll target it at small and medium businesses with an employer national insurance bill under £100,000 a year. We will also bring the treatment of capital losses for the largest companies into line with that of income losses. Mr. Deputy Speaker, we recommit today to keeping family homes out of capital gains tax, but some aspects of private residence relief extend it beyond that objective and provide relief for people who are not using the home as their main residence. So from April 2020, we will limit lettings relief to properties where the owner is in shared occupancy with the tenant and reduce the final period exemption from 18 months to 9 months. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I have received representations that I should abolish entrepreneurs' relief and put the savings towards funding our NHS commitments. But I do not believe we can have sustainable public services unless we have a dynamic economy. And encouraging entrepreneurs must be at the heart of any strategy for a dynamic economy. So I will retain entrepreneurs' relief, but to ensure it is going to genuine entrepreneurs, I will extend the minimum qualifying period from 12 months to 2 years. Mr. Deputy Speaker, in the period since the last budget, we've explored all avenues to address the cliff edge effect of VAT registration, but our options are restricted by EU law. We will continue to work on this issue as our future VAT regime becomes clear over the years ahead. And in the meantime, to give small businesses certainty, and in response to representations from my right honourable friend, the member for Mid Worcestershire, the FSB and others, I will leave the threshold unchanged for a further 2 years. Mr. Deputy Speaker, the off-payroll working rules, known as IR35, are designed to ensure fairness, so that individuals working side by side in a similar role for the same employer pay the same employment taxes. Last year, we changed the way these rules are enforced in the public sector, but widespread non-compliance also exists in the private sector. So following our consultation, we will now apply the same changes to private sector organisations as well. But after listening carefully to representations made, including many from my honourable and right honourable friends, during the consultation, we will delay these changes until April 2020, and we will only apply them to large and medium-sized businesses. Mr. Deputy Speaker, there is one standout example of where the rules of the game must evolve now if they are to keep up with the emerging digital economy. Digital platforms delivering search engines, social media and online marketplaces have changed our lives, our society and our economy, mostly for the better. But they also pose a real challenge for the sustainability and fairness of our tax system. The rules have simply not kept pace with changing business models, and it is clearly not sustainable or fair that digital platform businesses can generate substantial value in the UK without paying tax here in respect of that business. The UK has been leading attempts to deliver international corporate tax reform for the digital age. A new global agreement is the best long-term solution, but progress is painfully slow. We cannot simply talk forever. So we will now introduce a UK digital services tax. This will be a narrowly targeted tax on the UK-generated revenues of specific digital platform business models. It will be carefully designed to ensure it is established tech giants rather than our tech startups that shoulder the burden of this new tax. It is important that I emphasise that this is not an online sales tax on goods ordered over the internet. Such a tax would fall on consumers of those goods, and that is not our intention. The digital services tax will only be paid by companies which are profitable and which generate at least £500 million a year in global revenues in the business lines in scope. We will consult on the detail to make sure we get it right and to ensure that the UK continues to be the best place in the world to start and scale up a tech business. The tax will come into effect in April 2020 and is expected to raise over £400 million a year. In the meantime, we will continue to work at the OECD and the G20 to seek a globally agreed solution, and if one emerges, we will consider adopting it in place of the UK digital services tax. But this step shows that we are serious about this reform because, Mr. Deputy Speaker, it is only right that these global giants with profitable businesses in the UK pay their fair share towards supporting our public services. And, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I am already looking forward to my call from the former leader of the Liberal Democrats. We're updating the rules of the game, but we must also make sure that people play by the rules. And today, we continue the work of the past 8 years, where we've secured £185 billion since 2010, which would otherwise have gone unpaid, with a package of measures today to further clamp down on tax avoidance, evasion and unfair outcomes, raising another £2 billion over the next 5 years. We will make HMRC a preferred creditor in business insolvencies to ensure that tax which has been collected on behalf of HMRC is actually paid to HMRC. We'll end the practice of purchasing services through overseas branches to avoid UK VAT, and we'll crack down on insurance companies routing services through offshore territories. And we'll stop our generous R&D tax credit system being abused by reintroducing a PAYE restriction for the small and medium-sized companies scheme. Mr. Deputy Speaker, Labour talk tough on tax avoidance and evasion. We take action. Mr. Deputy Speaker, investing in our infrastructure, backing the technologies of the future, supporting British businesses, updating our tax system for the digital age. That is how we will deliver the high-wage, high-skill economy of the future. But we must also recognise that technological change will bring challenges as well as opportunities. And there is one part of our economy that is currently confronting that challenge in spades: our high streets. Embedded in the fabric of our great cities, towns and villages, the high street lies at the heart of many communities, and it is under pressure as never before as Britain adopts online shopping with greater alacrity than any other large economy. So if Britain's high streets are to remain at the centre of our community life, they will need to adapt. Today, we support them to do so, responding to calls from across this House, especially from my right honourable friend, the member for Putney, and my honourable friends, the members for Southport and Croydon South. We will provide £675 million of co-funding to create a future High Streets Fund to support councils to draw up formal plans for the transformation of their high streets, to invest in the improvements they need and to facilitate redevelopment of underused retail and commercial areas into residential. At one and the same time, Mr Deputy Speaker, helping with the housing challenge and delivering much-needed footfall to high street businesses. We will consult on how modernisation of the use classes order and the CPO regime can help facilitate the transformation of the high street. Mr Deputy Speaker, the change that our high streets face is irreversible, and it will take them time to adapt to it. But I know that many small retail businesses are struggling to cope with the high fixed costs of business rates. Since 2016, we've introduced business rates relief measures worth £12 billion, and many of these reliefs will have benefited high street businesses. But today I can go further. At the next revaluation in 2021, rateable values will adjust to reflect changes in rental values. But I want to help retail businesses now. So for the next 2 years, up to that revaluation, for all retailers in England with a rateable value of £51,000 or less, I will cut their business rates bill by 1/3. That is an annual saving of up to £8,000 for up to 90% of all independent shops, pubs, restaurants and cafes. I will also extend the £1,500 local newspaper discount for a further year. Mr Deputy Speaker, whatever the national press says, I've been assured of a warm welcome for my budget from the Royston Crow and the Keswick Reminder. Mr Deputy Speaker, local authorities have long been able to provide discretionary business rates relief to other bodies, but not to themselves. And so, following representations from my honourable friends for North Cornwall and St Austell and Newquay, I'm pleased to announce a new mandatory business rates relief for public lavatories, so that local authorities can at last relieve themselves for the convenience of the House, Mr Deputy Speaker, and without wishing to get unduly bogged down on this subject, this relief, the House will be interested to know that this relief, well, at least I'm demonstrating that we are all British, aren't I? This relief will extend to any such facilities made available for public use, whether publicly or privately owned. And honestly, Mr Deputy Speaker, I can say that this is virtually the only announcement in this budget that hasn't leaked. Mr Deputy Speaker, Mr Deputy Speaker, we can't resolve the productivity challenge or deliver the high standards of living the British people deserve without fixing our housing market. In last year's budget, I launched a 5-year, £44 billion housing programme to deliver the biggest increase in housing supply since 1970, and I abolished stamp duty for first-time buyers on properties up to £300,000. 121,500 first-time buyers have already benefited from our new relief, and the number of first-time buyers is at an 11-year high. Today, I'm extending this relief to all first-time buyers of shared ownership properties valued up to £500,000, and I will make this relief retrospective so that any first-time buyer who has made such a purchase since the last budget will benefit. But we have more to do, so I can announce today a further £500 million for the Housing Infrastructure Fund to unlock a further 650,000 homes. the next wave of strategic partnerships with 9 housing associations, which will deliver 13,000 homes across England, up to £1 billion of British Business Bank guarantees to support the revival of SME house builders. We're consulting on simplification of the process for conversion of commercial property into new homes, and because we want to see parishes and neighbourhoods enabling more homes for sale to local people to buy at prices they can afford, we're providing funding to empower up to 500 neighbourhoods to allocate or permission land for housing through the neighbourhood planning system for sale at a discount to local people in perpetuity. I'm also grateful to my right honourable friend, the member for West Dorset, for his review of build-out rates published today. He concludes that the large house builders are not engaged in systematic speculative land banking, and he makes several recommendations. Well, maybe the honourable lady would like to read the report. He makes several recommendations for reform of the planning system in respect of very large strategic housing sites, and we will respond in full to his report in the new year. Mr Deputy Speaker, meeting the productivity challenge means tapping the potential of every region and nation. Our devolution agenda is giving power back to the people. And today we go further to fire up the Northern Powerhouse, fuel the Midlands engine and back our regions across the UK. We're increasing the Transforming Cities Fund to £2.4 billion and providing an additional £90 million to trial new models of smart transport, including on-demand buses. I think, Mr Deputy Speaker, that's what we used to call in our day taxis. We're launching a competition for proposals for business-led development corporations. We're funding 10 university enterprise zones. There's £115 million for digital catapults in the North East, Northern Ireland and the South East, and the Medicines Discovery Catapult in Alderley. £70 million to develop the Defence and National Rehabilitation Centre near Loughborough, £37 million of additional development funding for Northern Powerhouse Rail, and £10 million for a new pilot in Manchester to support the self-employed to acquire new skills. We're backing a new special economic area in South Tees, and we're providing £20 million to further develop the plan for the critical central section of East-West Rail between Oxford and Cambridge. And here in our capital, we support the delivery of a further 19,000 homes by improving the Docklands Light Railway with Housing Infrastructure Fund money. Mr Deputy Speaker, the decisions announced in this budget means in 2021 an additional £950 million for the Scottish Government, £550 million for the Welsh Government and £320 million for a Northern Ireland executive. Obviously, much larger sums to come as we move ahead over the spending review period with our NHS funding change. I can also announce funding for further city and growth deals, including £150 million for Tay Cities, £350 million for Belfast and £120 million for North Wales, while negotiations progress with Ayrshire, Mid Wales and Borderlands, and will begin with Murray, Derry Londonderry and Strabane as well. I was pleased to be able to respond to a joint request from the members for Belfast North, Belfast East and Belfast South to provide the city with £2 million help towards the recovery of the city centre following the fire at the iconic Banks building. And we're also moving forward with schools projects in Northern Ireland worth £300 million to increase the provision of shared and integrated cross-community education. And we've agreed to the establishment of a working group to progress plans for short-haul APD devolution. To continue to support Scotland's oil and gas industry, we will maintain headline tax rates at their current level and launch a call for evidence on our plan to make Scotland a global hub for decommissioning. And finally, to support our vital fishing industry as we leave the EU, will invest £12 million over the next 3 years in cutting-edge fisheries technology and safety measures. A Conservative government, Mr Deputy Speaker, delivering for all our proud nations and for all our English regions, driving growth and prosperity across our United Kingdom. Mr Deputy Speaker, we are driven by a determination to ensure that the next generation will be more prosperous than ours. But we cannot secure our children's future unless we secure our planet's future. So at this budget, I take further action with a package of measures set out in the Red Book to ensure that we leave our environment in a better state than we inherited it. There is one particular measure I want to mention. The Shadow Chancellor's recent accident has reminded us all how dangerous abandoned waste can be. So I will provide £10 million to deal with abandoned waste sites, although I cannot guarantee to the House that £10 million is going to be enough to stop him falling flat on his face in the future. Mr Deputy Speaker, I also said at the spring statement that we must become a world leader in tackling the scourge of plastic littering our planet and our oceans. Billions of disposable plastic drinks cups, cartons, bags and other items are used every year in Britain. Convenient for consumers, but deadly for our wildlife and our oceans. Where we cannot achieve reuse, we are determined to increase recycling. So we will introduce a new tax on the manufacture and import of plastic packaging which contains less than 30% recycled plastic, transforming the economics of sustainable packaging. We will consult on the detail and implementation timetable. I have also looked carefully at the case for introducing a levy on the production of disposable plastic cups, not just for coffee, but for all types of beverage. I have concluded that a tax in isolation would not, at this point, deliver a decisive shift from disposable to reusable cups across all beverage types. I will monitor carefully the effectiveness of the action which the takeaway drinks industry is already taking to reduce single-use plastics, and I will return to this issue if sufficient progress is not made. But in parallel, my Right Honourable friend, the Environment Secretary, will look to address this issue through the reform of the Packaging Producer Responsibility Scheme. Working across government, this ambitious package reflects our determination to lead the world in the crusade to rid the oceans and the environment of plastic waste. Mr Deputy Speaker, it is only by dealing with our debts and tackling the long-term challenges our country faces that we can sustainably raise wages and living standards. But I recognise that many people are feeling pressure on their household budgets now. And because the hard work of the British people is paying off, I am pleased to be able to announce today a series of measures to help families across Britain with the cost of living. Mr Deputy Speaker, turning first to duties, as my Right Honourable friend the Prime Minister has already announced, we will freeze fuel duties for the 9th successive year, bringing the total saving to the average car driver to over £1,000 and to the average van driver to over £2,500. The tobacco duty escalator will continue to rise at inflation plus 2%. Mr Deputy Speaker, I've received numerous representations from my honourable and right honourable friends on one particular subject, and in response, I will be freezing beer and cider duty for the next year, keeping the cost of beer down for patrons of the Great British Pub. And in response to the concerted lobbying of my Scottish Conservative colleagues, I will also freeze duty on spirits, so that we can all afford to raise a wee dram to Ruth Davidson on the arrival of baby Finn. Saving 2p on a pint of beer, 1p on a pint of cider and 30p on a bottle of scotch or gin compared to the inflation assumption in the OBR forecast, while proceeding with the usual RPI increases on wine. As promised at Autumn Budget 2017, so-called white ciders will be taxed at a new higher rate. From October next year, I can confirm that we will increase remote gaming duty on online games of chance to 21% in order to fund the loss of revenue as we reduce FOB-T stakes to £2. From April 2020, APD will be indexed in line with inflation, but there will be no change in the duty rate for short-haul flights. And the new 2630 rail card, which I announced at budget last year, will be available across the network by the end of the year, saving up to 4.4 million young people one-third of their fares. And we launch a package of measures on affordable credit and support for credit unions, which is set out in detail in the Red Book. Mr. Deputy Speaker, the switch to universal credit is a long overdue and necessary reform. It replaces the broken system left by the last Labour government. A system, Mr. Deputy Speaker, that trapped millions on out-of-work benefits for nearly a decade. This is not just a welfare measure, it is a major structural reform to our economy that will help to drive growth and employment in the years ahead. And I pay tribute to my right honourable friend, the member for Chingford, without whose tenacity universal credit would never have seen the light. But I recognise the genuine concerns among many honourable and right honourable friends about two issues. First, the implementation of this programme. It is an enormous undertaking, and we've always been clear we want the migration process to be as smooth as possible. I have already delivered nearly £3.5 billion to help with the transition, including a £1.5 billion package of support at last year's budget. Today, I can go further with a package of additional measures worth £1 billion over 5 years, enabling... What a surprise, Mr. Deputy Speaker. What a surprising response from the opposition front bench. A package of measures to aid the transition worth £1 billion over 5 years, enabling my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State for Work and Pensions, to introduce additional protections as existing welfare claimants move on to UC, and she will announce details when she introduces the managed migration regulations later this year. Secondly, I have heard the concerns about the rates and allowances within the design of the system. In my first autumn statement, I reduced the UC taper rate from 65% to 63%, and today I can tell the House that I am increasing work allowances in universal credit by £1,000 per annum at a cost of £1.7 billion annually once rollout is complete, benefiting 2.4 million working families with children, 2.4 million working families with children and people with disabilities by £630 per year. Mr. Deputy Speaker, universal credit is here to stay, and we are putting in the funding it needs to make it a success, because on this side of the House we believe that work should always pay. Mr. Deputy Speaker, delivering higher wages for those in work is core to my mission as Chancellor. Under this Conservative government, the poorest 20% have seen their real incomes grow faster than the richest 20%. And the proportion of jobs that are low paid is at its lowest level for 20 years, thanks to the national living wage introduced by a Conservative government in 2016. From April, it will rise again by 4.9%, from £7.83 to £8.21, handing a full-time worker a further £690 annual pay increase and taking his or her total pay rise since the introduction of national living wage to over £2,750 a year. We also accept the Low Pay Commission's recommendations on national minimum wage rates, supporting young people and apprentices with further above-inflation increases. The current remit for the Low Pay Commission is for the national living wage to reach 60% of median earnings by 2020, subject to sustained economic growth. But next year, we will need to give the Low Pay Commission a new remit beyond 2020. We will want to be ambitious with the ultimate objective of ending low pay in the UK. But we will also want to be careful protecting employment for lower paid workers. So we will engage responsibly with employers, the TUC and the Low Pay Commission itself over the coming months, gathering evidence and listening to views to ensure that we get this right, and I will confirm the final remit at the budget next year. But as well as making work pay, I hear the Honourable Lady, Mr. Deputy Speaker, but her point is slightly blunted by the fact that she made it in the autumn of 2016, she made it again in the spring of 2017, and she made it again in the autumn of last year. So, Mr. Deputy Speaker, as well as making work pay, we want working people to keep more of the money they earn. When we came into office, the personal allowance stood at £6,475 and the higher rate threshold at £43,875. In April, I raised the personal allowance to £11,850 and the higher rate threshold to £46,350 as steps towards our manifesto commitments of £12,500 and £50,000 respectively by 2020. Those manifesto commitments were, of course, made before our new funding pledge to the NHS, and I have received representations that the least painful way for taxpayers to contribute to increased NHS funding would be to abandon our manifesto pledges and freeze the personal allowance and the higher rate threshold at current levels. But let me reassure the House that, unlike the right honourable gentleman opposite, my idea of ending austerity does not involve increasing people's tax bills. I didn't come into politics to put taxes up, and the improvement we have delivered in the public finances means that, based on the OBR's forecast published today, I do not need to do so. I can therefore confirm today that I will meet our manifesto commitments in April 2020, raising the personal allowance to £12,500 and the higher rate threshold to £50,000 before indexing both in line with inflation from 21-22. But our careful management of the economy allows me to go further. So I will raise both the personal allowance and the higher rate threshold to these levels from April 2019, delivering our manifesto commitments 1 year early. A tax cut for 32 million people, £130 in the pocket of a typical basic rate taxpayer, meaning since 2015 we've taken 1.7 million people out of tax altogether and nearly 1 million people out of higher rate tax. And Mr. Deputy Speaker, as a result of the announcements I have made today, a single parent receiving universal credit and working 25 hours a week on national living wage will benefit by £890 next year. The hard work of the British people paying off in hard cash in their pockets. Mr. Deputy Speaker, we have turned an important corner and now we must pull together to build the bright, prosperous future that is within Britain's grasp if we choose to seize it. Embracing change, not hiding from it. Building on the inherent strength of the British economy and the indomitable spirit of the British people. Mr. Deputy Speaker, under this Conservative government, austerity is coming to an end, but discipline will remain. Austerity is coming to an end, but discipline will remain. And that is the clear dividing line in British politics today between a Conservative government delivering on the British people's priorities, supporting our public services, investing in Britain's future, keeping taxes low and getting our debt down, or the Corbyn Party, whose idea of ending austerity is to raise taxes to their highest level in peacetime history, who would send our debt soaring, who would squander the hard-won achievements of the past 8 years and take this country back to square one. We are at a turning point in our history, and we must resolve to go forwards, not backwards, and work together to build a Britain that we can all be proud of. And I commend this statement to the House.
Under Standing Order number 51, the first motion, entitled Provisional Collection of Taxes, must be decided without debate. Will the Chancellor of the Exchequer please move formally?
Formally, Mr. Deputy Speaker.
The question is that, pursuant of Section 5 of the Provisional Collection of Taxes Act 1968, provisional statutory effect shall be given to the following motions. A. Stamp duty reserve tax, brackets listed securities and connected persons, brackets, motion number 49. B. Tobacco products. Order. Can I just say to honourable members need to listen to what's going to affect their constituents. I will say once again that honourable members may be interested in what affects their constituents, because I certainly am. And what I will say, we won't know what affects them and what doesn't until I can complete it. And let us complete it. And I don't need any help from the light benches. Right. As many of that opinion say aye. Aye. The contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. I now call upon the Chancellor of the Exchequer to move the motion entitled Income Tax (brackets charge). It is on the motion that the debate will take place today and on succeeding days. The questions on this motion and on the remaining motions will be put at the end of the budget debate on Thursday, the 1st of November. Minister to move. The question is the income tax charge for the tax year 2019-20, and declared that it is expedient and in the public interest that this resolution should have statutory effect under the provisions of the Provisional Collection of Taxes Act. I now call the Leader of the Opposition, the Right Honourable Jeremy Corbyn.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, the reality is that whatever the Chancellor claims today, austerity is not over. And far from building a strong economy, 8 years of austerity has damaged our economy, delayed and weakened the recovery, and endlessly postponed fixing the deficit. Unnecessary austerity has caused real hardship to millions of our fellow citizens, held down living standards for the majority, and failed on its own terms. Mr. Deputy Speaker, people have had enough.
Order. Just sit down. Order.
Wants to kid the public, he's ditching it.
Can I just say that we heard the Chancellor of the Exchequer. I expect to hear the Leader of the Opposition. Those who may have been put themselves in a position thinking I can't see them, yes, I can. And I don't want to hear any more. I want to hear the Chancellor of the Exchequer in the same way that your constituents do. Jeremy Corbyn.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. The Prime Minister pledged austerity is over. This, Mr. Deputy Speaker, is a broken promise budget. What we've heard today are half measures and quick fixes while austerity grinds on. And far from people's hard work and sacrifices having paid off, as the Chancellor claims, this government has frittered it away in ideological tax cuts to the richest in our society. This budget won't undo the damage done by 8 years of austerity and doesn't begin to measure up to the scale of the job that needs to be done to rebuild Britain. The government claims austerity has worked, so now they can end it. But that is absolutely the opposite of the truth. Austerity needs to end because it has failed. Just 2 years ago, he forecast growth of 2.1% next year and the year after. Today, he boasts he's created robust economic growth, but the forecasts have been dropped to just 1.6% next year and 1.4% the year after. Economic growth in the first half of this year was the slowest since 2011. The last year we had the lowest growth of any major economy. This is not a strong economy, but a weak one, with chronically low investment, low wages and low productivity. And, Mr. Deputy Speaker, the uncertainty caused by this government's shambolic handling of Brexit is making things even worse. The warnings come...
Order. Mr. Bowen, Mr. Philip, I expect better. You're very obviously right in my sight, so I suspect you either go quietly out of the chamber if you can't behave. Jeremy Corbyn.
Very good. The warnings come from across the economy, the car industry, farming and food, road haulage. UK manufacturing is currently in recession. So much for the much vaunted March of the Makers. Mr. Deputy Speaker, they said austerity would mean the deficit would close by 2015. Today, the Chancellor has confirmed it will still be there 9 years later in 2024. Even now, great chunks of the deficit have simply been palmed off to others, not eradicated, moved into the accounts of NHS trusts, shuffled onto the books of local councils that have collapsed, with many more on the brink, and most worryingly and frightening for many people, loaded onto the very fast rising levels of personal and household debt. For too long, the party opposite peddled the myth that the last Labour government crashed the economy by overspending on public services. As if, Mr. Deputy Speaker, investing to bring health spending, as the last Labour government did, up to European levels had caused the global financial crash. Mr. Speaker, on this side of the House, we believe that spending on public services is an investment that benefits the health of our people and the economy of our country. This morning, the Health Secretary said that it would take a generation to achieve parity of esteem of mental health, and refused to say whether the money was ring-fenced. And that money is only half of what leading mental health experts say is necessary. But, Mr. Deputy Speaker, the impact of austerity on our people's health is more than the NHS funding. Improvements in life expectancy are stalling for the first time in modern history, and in the poorest areas of our country, life expectancy is actually falling and child mortality is rising. The National Health Service, our precious National Health Service, is a thermometer of the well-being of our society. But the illness is austerity, cuts to social care, failure to invest in housing and slashing of real social security. It has one inevitable consequence. People's health has got worse and demands on the National Health Service have increased. 1.4 million elderly people not getting the care they need. Tory cuts have taken £7 billion, Mr Deputy Speaker, from social care budgets. Today's announcement is a drop in the ocean, both for adult and child social care. And at this time of rising demand, nurse numbers are falling, GP numbers are falling, health visitor numbers are falling, and there are 10,000 vacancies for doctors in our National Health Service. Under the last Labour government, the NHS budgets averaged an increase of 6% a year. That's been slashed to just 1.4% under this government. The Health Foundation says the government's much-heralded extra money for the National Health Service is, and I quote, simply not enough. While the IFS says funding at this level will only maintain current levels. And let's remember what the current levels are in the NHS. Record waiting times at accident and emergency.
Mr Hoare, I think we know better. We caught each other the eye before. I won't want to catch it again. Seriously.